Recovery Daily podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Miller. I'm a stroke survivor and grateful recovering alcoholic. And today's topic is physical, chemical, and emotional stress. When I came out of my detox and went to IOP, I learned about stress and how to cope with stress. And what I also learned is that the reason why they teach this to recovering alcoholics is because people who have addictive diseases are stress sensitive. You can imagine when you are withdrawing from something, that if for any of you who used to smoke and you are trying to quit smoking, you almost feel like maybe you need to go on a week vacation and try to get off of the cigarettes and not be around anybody because you're just nasty. At least that's how I felt when I quit smoking. And so eliminating alcohol from your body, same thing. You're very prone to stress. And so what we learned is that it's important to recognize, manage, and reduce your stress. And we learned about where you are most likely going to find stress. All of this is pretty self-explanatory, like job-related stress due to meeting deadlines or having too much work or having conflicts with your coworkers or your boss. Another source of stress is your personal life, marriage problems, money problems, illness. And then third, your environment. So just being around people would be one source of stress, traffic, and just an inability to relax. Maybe your home life is stressful, you're in an unhappy marriage, something like that. So being able to recognize these sources of stress. And then we learned the standard ideas for how to manage your stress. So setting aside time for yourself, exercising, doing deep breathing and hobbies and meditation. You've heard it before. And then how to reduce your stress, talking about going to therapy, making sure you get sleep, good nutrition, growing spiritually. And so what I think is interesting, so what I've learned later is, wouldn't it be nice if we could manage the stress before we feel it rather than dealing with it after the fact? By then it's managing stress and reducing stress. These techniques and methodologies it's too late at that point. But nonetheless, I was given something called tips for coping with stressful situations. So TIPS is the acronym, TIPS. And so because, back to recovering alcoholics, because stressful situations pose dangers for recovering alcoholics, they really can't afford to get overwhelmed by events, especially early in sobriety. So, TIPS, what does that stand for? Oh dear. My phone is talking again. Sorry about that. I'm learning voiceover, I told you before, but I'm having a hard time having it turn off during podcasts. So we were interrupted. Here we are. We're back at, what does TIPS stand for, Rachel? Well, I'll tell you. So T stands for truth. So this is how to cope with stressful situations. Number one, truth. Be honest about how you feel. Keeping things inside will only add to stress and worry. And it's funny how when you tell somebody about how you're feeling, sometimes you say it and then you're like, well, that sounds ridiculous when I say it out loud. So that's another reason why it's important to talk about how you feel. So T is for truth. I is for information. Ignorance is not bliss. So arm yourself with knowledge. Whatever it is that you're stressed about. So, for example, I'm stressed about my health. I'm stressed about is this vision therapy going to work for me? Well, the best thing I can do is research it. So that's why you keep hearing voiceover in the background, because I'm learning how to use it so that I can do my own research online. So arm yourself with knowledge. I is information. P is for priorities. Keep your priorities straight. So when you're in a stressful situation, it's really easy to kind of lose your focus. So this is more about keeping your eye on the prize. If you're, I can tell you, I've been to a lot of meetings at work where I start getting stressed out. There's lots of side conversations, and we almost lose our focus of the meeting and start identifying this is a problem, that is a problem. And so, and that just causes a lot of stress. And even though those are important additional problems that we need to look at, what we should do in the moment, though, is maybe put that information, we call it, put it in the parking lot, and really keep our eye on what is most important and concentrate only on those few things. So the same with stress in life. So keeping your priorities. And then S stands for support. Use your support network, whether that is people in a fellowship, friends, family, a therapist. So those are the tips that I learned for coping with stressful situations. However, like I said, I feel like it's too late at the point where we're talking about managing stress. So I wanted to look into, what does stress do to the brain, and how can I eliminate it from the start? How can I avoid getting stressed from the beginning? And so stress can come in lots of different forms. And I think that when you're in recovery, whether it is from alcoholism or in stroke recovery like I am, you almost can't decipher it sometimes. Like, it's pretty easy. Maybe looking from the outside in, it's easy to see somebody who is detoxing off of alcohol, that they are adding chemical stress to their body. Like, their cells are requiring alcohol and you are keeping it away from them. So that is more of a chemical stress. And then the emotional stress, that's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning of this episode. What are the environmental type things that cause us emotional stress? And then finally, there's physical stress. And I think that the physical stress can very much be tied to recovery from alcoholism, but also the the recovery that I'm going through right now and vision therapy. So the the goal of vision therapy is to not cause my brain uh, too much physical stress or strain. So, um, what I was doing today, and I don't know that I should have done it, but I did it anyway because that's what I do because I'm a fool. I was standing outside with one of the dogs and just waiting because they just decide to go out there and do nothing instead of doing their business. So I was standing there, and we live in an area where the planes fly over pretty close to our house. So I haven't been able to look up and look at the plane go by because it goes too fast. It hurts my head. Well, today I looked up and I kept my eye on the plane, and um, I was inclined to look away. Usually I look away. It's like beyond my control. Look away because it just hurts. So it's like touching a hot stove kind of thing. You just pull away before you get severely burned. Well, I usually look away from the airplane going overhead before it starts hurting, but I didn't do that today. I guess it didn't cause the initial reaction that it usually does, which is kind of like it's an extreme jolt of dizziness and nausea kind of thing. Anyway, I that's what I think of as physical stress is what I'm trying to manage here with my vision. So, if people in recovery experience elevated stress, um, then I imagine that stress is it's devastating for your body and your brain. Stress is devastating for your brain. So I wanted to learn more about how stress impacts the brain and what I can do in order to encourage um, good brain health, I guess. So, what I learned is that I may not notice low stress, and that's what's happening to me. I just had an epiphany. When I am doing something like let's look at the plane again. When I'm doing something like standing outside and I'm watching the clouds go by, that's about the speed that I can watch something move. So I'm watching the clouds go by. If I stand there long enough watching the clouds go by, I'll start to feel a low level of strain in my head. What I call it, and I've talked about it before, is the rubber band feeling. I can feel the rubber band feeling start kicking in, and it feels like a low level of stress in my head, I guess, physically. And so if I ignore that, which I have been trying really hard to start acknowledging that it's there, because once I start feeling it'll go from 0 to 10 in an instant. If I continue to expose my eyes to whatever it is that is causing that rubber band feeling in my head. And so from that constant exposure and shooting up to a 10, um, then all of a sudden it would probably look like I'm overreacting to the stress. So if I'm standing there looking at the clouds and I stand there just a few seconds too long, then I'll all of a sudden look away and you'll probably hear me go, "Oh," because it just gives me this really bad feeling, this nausea and dizziness, and it feels like a hangover. And so so we'll call that high stress. So once I feel that high stress feeling, um, then that's when we've got problems. That's when I start getting sharp pains in my head. I have all these extra symptoms of nausea. And if it gets too bad, like you may have noticed in yesterday's episode, I will start being challenged to finish my sentences or find words that are usually easier to come by. I'll be challenged by remembering the word. So what I learned is four um, four activities, let's say, that are conducive to a healthy brain, which will help us reduce stress. And this should help reduce physical, chemical, and emotional stress. And I'm going to get a little more into the chemical a little later, but physical and emotional stress for sure. So these are going to sound very familiar, but what I think is interesting is to look at this from the perspective of brain health rather than looking at it from the manage stress and reduce stress. That is like managing the after effect, which is the stress. What we're talking about is preparing our brains ahead of time to be able to avoid stress. So, the first one is exercise. So, exercise encourages the connections in our brain. So, I'm going to talk in a little bit about the connections in our brain. And I want you to think back to the episode on happy chemicals because all of this ties together. So, exercise encourages brain connections. Number 2, sleeping well. I mentioned it before in one of the episodes about how sleeping, when we sleep, it's like our brain is hitting the save button. So while we're sleeping, our neuroconnections are strengthened and our brain reorganizes itself. So these things that we learn, they really get kind of imprinted on our brain while we're sleeping. The third one is food, and I've heard this several times, so I thought I would share. We talk about it in my home a lot, that a Mediterranean diet is extremely healthy for your brain. A Mediterranean diet is very full of fruits, veggies, fish, olive oil, and nuts. So as soon as I mentioned this to my boyfriend earlier today, he he reached into the cabinet and pulled out a bowl of walnuts for me to start eating. And I said, oh, why, thank you. So, so a Mediterranean diet. And the fourth one is meditation. And so meditation is considered training for your brain. It is, I talk about practicing meditation. Well, it is. It's practicing, it's training, it's learning how to control your emotions, learning how to control your focus, your awareness, and all of that stuff. So, to support a healthy brain to avoid stress or better handle it when you feel it coming on, you want to exercise, sleep, eat a Mediterranean diet or something similar, and meditation. So this is also what's interesting. All of this seems to be tying together. All of this research that I'm doing about brain stuff and chemicals and all of that stuff. So what the vision therapy is doing for me is it's to encourage neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is how our brain changes due to our experiences. I think years and years and years ago, they thought that your brain didn't change, that once you reach a certain age, like you're done being a sponge and can't teach an old dog new tricks and all that stuff. And although it may be a little more difficult to learn as we get older, our brain still rewires itself. And so that's what my vision therapy is all about. It's about the part of my brain that died. I have to use the other parts of my brain to take on the tasks that the dead part of my brain used to do. So, how can I encourage neuroplasticity? How can I encourage my brain to make those connections? So, of course, these are almost identical to what we can do to support a healthy brain to avoid stress. So, number one, paying attention. So, we're talking about neuroplasticity. Keep up, keep up. We're talking about neuroplasticity. Number one, pay attention, mindfulness. So, having that mental control and focus encourages, just like I said, for the stress activities, encourages connections in our brain. And one thing that I learned that it's really interesting to me is if you meet an activity with a boost of adrenaline, so that it causes you to be more alert, then that also will be helpful to like encourage those neural connections. So you learn better if you have a boost of adrenaline go through your body when you are exposed to something. So coffee or somebody blowing an air horn at you, something like that, will encourage you to remember and learn. I thought that was interesting. So number two, to encourage neuroplasticity, exercise. And that was number one for how we're going to avoid stress. So number three, encouraging neuroplasticity, is repetition. So in vision therapy, what I have to do is I have to do this exercise where I'm looking at something, a card that is 6 feet away from me, and then I count to 3, and then I look at a card that's 13 feet away from me, and I count to 3, and I go back and forth and back and forth. So what's interesting is I've been doing this for several weeks now, and then last week, all of a sudden, the closer card was clear. I could see it. It was clear as day. It was crystal clear. And then, so I had to move the card about 3 to 5 inches closer to me, and then do the same exercise, and now it's not clear anymore. So it's amazing to me how days and days of doing this twice a day, how that I actually could see the result from the work that I've been doing, from the repetition. So to be able to see something like that happening is proof to me that all this bullshit that I'm reading is not bullshit. It's true. So I need to continue to have hope, and I've talked a lot about hope. I have a whole episode about hope. And so when we can see that our behaviors we can see the results from our behaviors, then it really feeds hope. The next thing that encourages neuroplasticity is taking breaks. So I do my homework. I do my card homework. And so that's like I'm at 19 cycles at this point. And then I take a break. I actually take a break for several hours, and then I do it again in the afternoon. And taking that break in the middle is conducive to building those neural connections too. That's also why it's important when we have like a class at work or something like that we give lots of breaks, because it encourages learning for lots of reasons. And then the last one is sleep. So that was also a part of the avoiding stress. So neuroplasticity is encouraged by, number 1, mindfulness, paying attention; 2, exercise; 3, repetition; 4, breaks; and 5, sleep. So then we get the happy chemicals involved. So we learned that serotonin is what flows when we feel important. And serotonin also gets flowing when we are involved in repetitive behaviors. So that's interesting, because that ties right into my vision therapy. And then dopamine is a surge of pleasure when we accomplish something. So you can imagine that when one day I sat down to do my homework with my vision therapy cards, and I all of a sudden could see the closer card more clearly, I probably had a little rush of dopamine because I accomplished something. At least it felt like it. And so endorphins, and these are what exercise provides us. So I took my dog Autumn out today to the school beside my house, and they have a really nice playground that they just finished. So after her and I went into the field, I I just like sometimes she'll just stand next to me because she just wants to be next to me. So I have to like act like I'm getting ready to run. And so I take a couple steps and then she'll just launch into like 50-mile run or 50-yard run or something like that. So anyway, that's enough exercise for me really to just be out there and try to get her running. But we went over to the playground and I was doing agility exercises with her. So I got her to go on the merry-go-round. So I got her to get up there and lay down, and she just rode it while I spun it around slowly, of course. And then we walked all over the little jungle gym thing, and I got her to go down the slide. She wouldn't go down the slide until I went down the slide first. And then I took her down the big slide. And again, she wouldn't do it until I did it first. So I started going down the big slide and she wanted to go right after me. So we had a collision at the bottom of the slide. And then all of a sudden, I see her whole body launch over my head and she jumped over my head. So, but she came back for more, so she didn't get hurt or anything. So I had her going up and down the jungle gym slide. It was pretty fun. Um, so today I focused on doing these things that are going to encourage my neuroplasticity. And I'm hoping that you got some value also, because it's not just somebody who had a stroke who can benefit from doing these types of things that encourage neuroplasticity, because we're trying to learn things every day, and also to manage stress. It all seems to be tied together. So that's what I have for you today. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.